And now something completely different and new from Bethesda pre-E3 event. Bengt, you got to see something completely new that wasn't new Doom or new Fallout. Can you tell us what did you see?
So that's correct. I mean, I was going here and it's a secret game, and of course everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's the new Fallout! Oh my God, it's the new Doom! Oh my God, it's Dishonored 2." It's none of the above. Although it has a little bit of a connection to Dishonored, we should say. This is the game that BattleCry Studios, that studio that was set up by Bethesda in I think late 2012, with some Rich Fogel, who was one of the key members of BioWare Austin. He set up a studio with other people from BioWare Austin and eventually other people as well, to do something new. And of course everyone thought at the time, oh, they're doing Fallout Online. They did not do Fallout Online. Instead, what they're doing is simply the same game that the studio is named after, BattleCry. That's the game they've been working on. It's hard to say. It's like basically a melee-based Team Fortress, you could say, with design from Viktor Andonov, who's the designer who did Half-Life and Dishonored. So it's got a very stylistic approach to the visuals, and it's set in sort of an alternate reality, sort of 1800s, 1900s, somewhere around that time, without gunpowder. Gunpowder was outlawed when the big factions did war. Instead, war is played out in sort of like these war zones, these designated areas where they vie for control, and instead there's a lot of swords and crossbows and weird things like that. So it's very intense, extremely fast. There's a lot about movement and a lot about team play. And we got to try a little bit of team deathmatch with 3 different character classes, and so it's something a little bit different. And we guys got to see, like, what we got to sample was basically play the game, feel the mechanics, but it feels like they're holding back on a lot of information and just trying to get answers. I could see some of the stuff I asked about, they smiled a lot. So. I think what's really interesting here is that they revealed 2 factions, but there's going to be 3 factions, and I think that maybe this will be the real hook of the game if it's a three-way game in all the different modes, because you can just imagine like the classic modes that you'd play in a first-person shooter. If you play with 3 teams instead, the objective-based, team-based things, that's going to be very different dynamics. Sometimes 2 teams might have to work together to take down a third, or things will constantly change, and you can maybe hold back a little bit and let the others fight a little bit, and there's a lot of different dynamics going on there that could be interesting, but we didn't yet see any of that. We sit with two factions fighting each other in a straightforward team deathmatch, and it was a lot of fun. It's very much felt like an arcadey console game. Very responsive, and I played it with a controller, but it's coming out for PC.
That's a pretty interesting twist to it, that it is so arcadey but still PC. Yeah. But about the dynamic, did they really reveal many of the classes already?
Yes, they actually revealed all 5 classes that's in there now. See, I played. See, where we go. I'm gonna see here. Next page. There we go. I played 3 of them, and it was the Enforcer, which is the classic tank sort of character, has a big sword that you can swing with the right trigger, and the left trigger you transform into a big shield. So it has both offensive and defensive capabilities, and then you have these massive special attacks that you just turn into like a giant windmill, and you know, this was obviously the class that everyone went for to begin with. You know, everybody knows how to play it, and you know, you deal a lot of damage and so on and so forth. Second class was something called duelist, which is like a thief, basically. You have these launching attacks that you can cover a lot of distance with, and quick attacks, but you can also cloak, so you can be invisible, and you have a few other tricks up your sleeve, and it's a class that sort of takes a little bit more smarts, perhaps, but a lot of fun to play. Of course, you don't want to get into a sort of straightforward battle with an enforcer when you're that class, but maybe you can sneak up and do some damage from behind or help out if there's. I mean, a lot of it's all about sort of seeing where people are fighting and then just taking advantage of the situation. The third class that I played was Tech Archer. It's just your standard ranged class. Has sort of a crossbow that it shoots for far distances. Of course, the game is so fast that you can't really play like a typical camper because people are just running around. So you can't, you really just be firing randomly into crowd, perhaps. But you can do that if you will, but there's also a lot of elevation in the map, so you need to find the good spots for this archer character. But you know, a good tactic is also to run behind a few tanks and then sort of try to get your arrows in when they face off with other you know, enemies. And but they also had these throwing knives, darts, that are a little bit better at close range, and there was also like a burst attack that lets you repel your opponent. And this is like the thing that sort of, you know, put me off a little bit, because when I'm a ranged character and someone gets up close to me, it's always, oh, okay, I'm dead. But I actually had something to sort of deal with that, but you had to sort of relearn that, no, I'm not dead. I can actually do something about this. So that's kind of nice. And I think that all classes had these sort of things where they could do something that would sort of turn the tide a little bit, and they could get away, or they could, you know, do something like this. So that was an interesting thing that they did. But the class that I'm really excited about is the support class, the Gadgeteer, that they didn't reveal anything about, but just the name has me thinking that there's probably going to be the most sort of interesting class to play. And the fifth class was the Brawler, which is basically really up close. You have metal arms that you punch with, and yeah, a lot of damage when you can get really up close. And it's a really brutal game. I think it took me about 5 seconds until my head was decapitated most violently, and you can cut people in half, and there's a lot of blood. Of course, it's sort of cartoony, painterly style, so it's not as visceral as that, but it's certainly extremely violent. And when you get into like a huge brawl with maybe, I think it's 32 players, that's what we tried at least, and for most of the game there was this group of like 8 or 10 people who were just in a train going around, and they were almost invincible. They were just going around and killing. And when you get into a brawl, maybe 8 on each side, it's just mayhem. But it's over very quickly because there's no long duels or anything like that. It's just very quickly, violently over.
Yeah, I was going to ask about did the balance feel right? But I guess if it's so hectic and so violent all the time, it can be pretty hard to even figure out if it's fair or balanced.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, did I kill that guy, or did one of my 3 friends kill him? It's that sort of thing. But it did feel like they have so much in there that I can't really judge the balance yet, because you have to play much more, because there's so many alternatives that I barely even scratched the surface of. So I'm sure that if there's anything that I felt was a little bit imbalanced now, there's probably a remedy that I just didn't think of or use when I played that class. You know, I played maybe three games, I think, 10-15 minutes each, so it's not really enough to judge the balance like that. But I did feel like I could do well with all the classes. I just had to play it differently and use the map differently to be successful.
So did they tell how far they are in the development?
Well, they're aiming for beta next year, so obviously they have some ways to go. It did feel kind of polished at this point. I mean, you know, the experience was there, the mechanics were there, and it played well. But I suppose they're going to have to flesh it out, more modes, more maps, and of course the beta is going to be like, you know, any free-to-play game. They're going to roll out more and more content, and they're going to see what people want to have. So that's next. And there's the big meta game, of course. You have to have the meta game where the factions, of course, vie for control, and you know, there's going to be rewards if you help your faction, and if your faction does well, you're going to get rewards. There's going to be a currency called iron is going to be the currency that you can customize your things with, and you know, your typical thing where you can buy customization things, and you'll be able to perhaps speed your progress along, things like that. So
in like all in all, pretty surprising reveal, but not a total loss.
No, I mean it's something that we haven't really seen before. This sort of combination is something new, and you know, multiplayer melee, very much melee based. It's not really that big, not really a huge thing. So it's going to be interesting to see if it can find a new audience, an audience for this kind of game, because it plays a lot like a shooter, but it's not a shooter, and you know, that's interesting, and it's a PC game, but it plays like a console game a lot. That's also interesting, but you know, it has a lot of cool things to it, and it's a promising concept. But what's most promising to me is the things that they're not talking about yet, which is, you know, the more elaborate modes, and hopefully that will bring in 3 factions to do warfare on one map, because I think that is, I mean, you can just imagine an uneven amount of control points and 3 teams that could make things really interesting, and it could really make for a lot of swings in a match, like back and forth. So I'm looking forward to hearing more what they really plan to do with the game.
Any story behind the title BattleCry?
Yeah. Actually, there was actually an ability for the tank, a BattleCry, where he just raises his hand up in the air and screams, which supposedly helps morale or something, and maybe, you know, because you have these things where you can get into this sort of almost invincible mode, of course, like any good game should have super ultra mode or whatever. You have a meter that you fill up, and then you go into this rage mode, and I suppose that. And you can also empty that meter before it's full, and just be a little bit better at everything. So I guess it's sort of perhaps feeds into that system a little bit. But sadly, there was no one around me when I did my BattleCry, so I got slaughtered by 3 enemies. So
it's like once per match?
No, you can use it more, but I think there's a cooldown. I didn't really see how. I think the abilities all have cooldown, so you can't spam the abilities, and you use up some of that. I'm not really sure if you used up that ultra meter, but you can't spam your abilities. So, and you have to remember to use them as well in the right moments. But yeah, I mean, for a sort of straightforward game, there was a lot of sort of different tactics that, you know, all the face button uses did something, and then you have the triggers and the shoulder buttons. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
Cool.